Good evening, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for coming. My name's Cliff Weiner. I'm president of the POA. First on our agenda is we're going to stand for the pledge to the flag, and then we're going to be standing for a moment of silence for our first responders and our military personnel. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Next is some reading of our minutes from our last meeting, which was at Everglades Rec Center on June 15th. So our Secretary, Rep. Benson, will read the minutes.
All right. Thanks, Cliff.
Stand in front of the podium.
Yep. Good evening, all. We're just going to hit some of the highlights from the minutes. First point I wanted to make was in the announcements, we have a section during which we cover certain items, and then we cover an announcement time from board activities that we say. And what I wanted to say was Cliff mentioned that we are now publishing 60,000 POA bulletins, plus another 4,500 that receive it electronically. It's to keep all residents informed, include all the new residents in the southern portion of the villages. So with that area growing, that's where we get up to that kind of a number of bulletins that are going out each month to keep everybody informed of what's going on. There was a question from a resident asking about live streaming of Sumter County Commissioner meetings, and the answer was that most likely the ability to start adequate live streaming will be when the new building that they're going to go into is finished and it has the capability built into it. Then our speaker was Len Hathaway, who has every year covered tips on lightning protection, something we don't need to worry about here in Florida, though, obviously. All right, well, Florida has 110 lightning strikes per year, days of lightning strikes. But guess what? It is now the #2 lightning capital of the United States. Oklahoma beat out Florida by 0.6 of a point last year, based on whatever factors they put in to figure that out. So I guess you can feel a little more safe that you know you're not #1 lightning capital in the nation. More men than women have been struck by lightning with leisure activities, water-related, being the main environment. So I guess we're in another category ourselves. I guess I'm just electrified or something. I don't know. Golf fatalities from lightning strikes. There's been 11 since 2016, but as I was telling Len earlier, I saw in the paper yesterday that there was a gentleman age 71 that was struck and killed by lightning playing golf up in Pennsylvania like a day or two ago. The new terminology is, and I saw it in, I think in the paper the other day, when thunder roars, go indoors. Indirect strikes, those include flagpoles, trees, etc., more frequent but less severe effects. Need primary surge protection, such as a SECO unit on your outside electrical hookup to protect what you don't plug in, and secondary surge protection, cords and plugs to protect the rest of your electronics that you do plug in. Direct strikes, which would be a house, etc., are less frequent but more severe effects. A lightning protection system provides, an LPS as we call it, provides a path of least resistance, hence can minimize the damage potential. And Len was mentioning that there was a house, I guess, that got hit by lightning just yesterday from the lightning storms. It isn't in the paper just yet. The comment is, if you got a high tolerance for risk, do nothing. If you have a low tolerance for risk, then you might want to look into an LPS for peace of mind. The units cost anywhere from $1,300 to $3,500 installed, depending on the size of your home. Lightning strikes on homes in the villages since 2004. There were 20, 15 on stucco style houses, 5 on vinyl style, without LPS, and all had damage. 15 with LPS, and none had damage. Another item they brought up was the corrugated stainless steel tubing, or CSST, mainly north of CR 466. Would recommend installing an LPS or changing to steel piping if you have that kind of steel tubing for your gas lines and whatnot. Because they have seen a lot of cases where a lightning strike into the house might then cause the pipe to break a little bit and start venting, and that could start the fire right there then. There are various myths. I won't really go into all of them. Some of them make pretty logical sense, like lightning never strikes the same place twice, right? Okay, so a question was asked, do we need to have an installed LPS system checked? Yes, have it checked every 3 to 5 years or after a roof shingle installation. Do you need to have a SECO surge protection unit checked? The answer, no. Just ensure 2 red lights are on. And that was basically the main highlights of the meeting.
Thanks, Rev. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Second? All in favor? All opposed? Let me tell you guys something that's really kind of exciting. I wasn't going to say anything because I wasn't sure it was going to work before we have our treasurer's report. We've been recording our meetings for the last 2 months. This will be our 3rd month. You can go on our website and see May and June's meeting. But also tonight we're testing live streaming. You can go to our Facebook page. I'm watching it on my computer right now. And hopefully you'll be able to see the POA meeting whether you come or not. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, that we've worked hard and diligent to get it done, and it looks like we finally can do it. Thank you, Mike. Now it's our treasurer's report.
And I forgot all about that. I didn't spend a whole lot of time with my makeup today, so. Now I'll know for next time, you're right. Okay, for the month of June, we're halfway through the year, and for June we had $15,779, and our revenues for the year to date at end of June was 63% of revenues already. So we're doing pretty good in that category, and we have to really kind of attribute that to new advertisers. If you looked in the bulletin, you'll notice that there are quite a few new ones, and that the insert is in there for a food store that's near Mount Dora, I believe. So that's been working out pretty well. So expenses were $14,849. So we had an operating surplus of $929.13. And our operating funds total is $143,335.27. Thanks.
Thanks, Donna. Next, I want to tell you guys, last April we had our 4th shredding event. It was a huge success. We have another one that we will be doing in 2022 on April 9th at Wildwood Community Center again. Thank you, Bradley Arnold and Sumter County Commissioners. That venue worked out really, really well for us, and probably the smoothest one we've ever had. We had a lot of cars come through. So there'll be more information in our bulletin and on our website as we get closer to it. You will need a ticket, and it is for members only. So just keep it in mind. POA has decided a long time ago to work with the Sheriff's Office on the vial of life. I hope everybody in this room has a vial of life in their refrigerator. This is the vial of life. Whoops. This is the form that goes with it. There's 2 green stickers. There's a sheet that you fill out. You put 1 sticker on your front door, you put the other sticker on your refrigerator, put it on the top shelf of your refrigerator in the case of an emergency. The EMTs, when they come in, or the paramedics, will know that it's there. Seconds are gonna really be important. I had an issue with my wife, and I know how important it really is. We have a bunch of them in the back. Please take 1 or 2 for you or your wife. And while I'm talking about that, the POA is trying to help the Public Safety Department. We have Klingons that you can put on your car or your golf cart. I have them up in front. I have a whole stack here. You can come up after the meeting and get 1 or 2 or 3. Put them on there that we support our Public Safety Department. We think that that's really, really important. And I had to say that because Chief Gaines here. Please. Another thing that I need you guys to do is sign up for e-notification. How many people get e-notification? Not enough. We're in hurricane season now. It's really, really important to sign up for e-notification and get the notices when something bad's gonna happen. You can pick and choose what you want to be notified of. They will give you all the information you're ever gonna want. You're going to be happy you do it. We don't have enough people that are actually signed up. You go on the District Gov website and sign up. At our back tables, we got our friends from Seniors versus Crime, Realty Execs, our friends from Hospital Auxiliary, and I'm pretty sure that the thrift shop's getting pretty close to opening, isn't it? Yeah, okay, we all got to go back and support that. Those volunteers, the Hospital Auxiliary does a great job. The POA has a program where we will come to your social club or your groups and do a talk either on one of two subjects, either the POA, if you want any information about what's going on in the villages, or Sal and I will do an AED CPR to help you get started with the Neighbor to Neighbor program, probably the most important program that I've been involved in the villages. My neighborhood has one. We have had a couple of call-outs. It's really, really important. If you're interested in having us come, see Sal or me and we'll make arrangements. Cash raffle. 3 people are gonna win $30. Small crowd, we might cost us money. Jury will pass it out to the winners. I'm gonna read the last 4 numbers. 9161. By the way, if nobody claims it, it goes to the president. Okay, Maddie. 9208. Oh, the windmillers, okay. It's because they got their grandkids here, that's why they won. 8941. All the way in the back, Jerry. Thank you, guys. Okay, this is a part of the program where open forum, or we'll try and answer any question you might have. Tonight I have a lot of help because I have 3 commissioners. By the way, before I go any further, we have 3 of our Sumter County commissioners and Bradley Arnold, Sumter County administrator here. So if we have any questions about that, which I hope you'll hold until this presentation is done, and then we're going to take lots of questions. But any other question you might have, Jerry will come around, or Sal with the mic. We'll try and answer it. If we don't give an answer, I'll get one.
I just want to mention there was this fire last night in my community from a lightning strike.
I didn't hear what he said.
There was a lightning strike in my community that caused a fire last night. Not a big fire, thank God, but
What village?
Bridgeport, Arnold Valley.
Okay. Wow. You know about that one, Len? I figured you did.
Yeah, I was wondering why we don't have any sirens for hurricanes or any other disaster. I know the village was pushed out a long time ago. Everybody needs their own radio. So if you're out golfing or you're playing tennis or you're somewhere outside, you're not going to hear your own radio when it's plugged into the house. So small communities around it can always take and have these sirens put around.
I can answer the golf course part of it for you because the country clubs are owned by the developer and he wishes not to have it. I used to work there. I know that's just, they're not going to have them. We just don't have them. I don't really have an answer. I will try and get one, and we'll have Deb put it in our answer in the bulletin. Yes?
I think that many of the counties in Florida and Lake, Sumter, and Marion County, all 3 have the alert system that you can sign up for on the website. Frankly, it works, in my opinion, a little bit better than a siren. They call you on the phone, they text you, and they email you. And they don't quit until you acknowledge that you got it. So that's a pretty good system. Go to your county's website and sign up for that.
Thank you, Deb.
When you were mentioning the e-notification, did you say the POA web or another?
No, districtgov.org. it's the district's e-notification, and the emails come from the district.
And then my neighbor 2 doors down had a strike in Bonniebrook, it knocked all of their stuff out. When we got home, our electricity was also out 2 doors down, on the west side. And the very next door neighbor, she also had lost power too. And it threw out the, what do you call them? But we had to go in, what's that? The circuit breaker, yeah.
Yeah, well, surges happen here. Being an ex-electrician, I understand that. I've had it happen to me too.
Something I found interesting is that in many of the houses that have gas, they have a pressure bottle up in the attic. Lightning strike hits that, the house is gone. You pick that up on the house that was down at the end of Canal Street that laid there burned for a couple of years.
Yeah, the manifolds is in the attic above the garage.
Just to let you, the radio alert works great. We have one in our house, and it works 24/7, and it does the Tri-County. And so, if the radio is cheap, you get it at Walmart. You get it at Walmart for 15 or 18, 25, whatever it is, and it works super.
Yeah, well, it does. It's cheap, but the alert system from Marion Lake and Sumter County is cheaper because it doesn't cost anything. And you're definitely going to get it. I can attest to it. I get it from Marion County all the time. Any other questions? But thank you. Okay, don't see any, so it was an easy day. We're now going to have. Well, let me tell you before we go into that, because everybody runs out at the end of the meeting, so grabs the donuts, and I don't usually get a chance to say much. Next month, we're at Everglade Rec Center. Our speaker's going to be Chief Kane, Public Safety Department, and Richard Bear, our District Manager. So that's at Everglades Rec Center next month, just so you know. Okay, now it's time for our speaker, and after Bradley's done, we're going to take questions from the audience, but because I'm president and it's something I get to do, I'm going to ask the first couple of questions. So before you guys get real excited, I'll ask mine and then you can ask all yours. It's really a pleasure. Bradley's been third time? Second time. And we're really happy to have him. Hopefully he's going to talk about the budget, which I know that they just came out with. So Bradley, it's all yours.
First time was after a tax increase, and so it was a very large filled room to address the questions that were related to that budget that had been adopted. And Cliff was kind enough to say, wouldn't it be better to be able to present the proposed budget to the POA before the public hearings so that the public has a little bit of an idea of what's being proposed, the services and the improvements that are planned. And so we actually were going to do that last year, but then there was no place to meet because COVID had all of the recreation facilities shut down. So we did miss that opportunity to ask you why Cliff thought this was the third time. It is the third time that he's invited me, so I really do, again, appreciate the opportunity. The timing is also really good because I wanted to make sure that I presented to you after I had already presented the proposed budget to the Board of County Commissioners and received some of the board's policy direction. That policy direction helps me move from the proposed budget to what's called a tentative budget. So the tentative budget is what we formally advertise. We actually have the first public hearing, that'll be in September, and we'll have that at the Everglades Regional Recreation Center. And that's the opportunity for the public to come during the public hearing and address the board related to any questions or any concerns that they may have related to the budget for next fiscal year. Our fiscal year starts October 1 and it runs through September 30th. After that public hearing related to the tentative budget, the board makes their determination to move the millage rate forward, to move the budget forward, and then we have a second public hearing, and that's when we transition from the tentative budget to the final budget. And that's also when the board makes the determination on the final millage rate. Once they make that decision at the end of September at that public hearing, then it moves forward with communicating that information to the state, to the property appraiser, to the tax collector, and then you have the joyous benefit of receiving the tax bill shortly after that particular process. One of the things that we really do see, and it's a testimony to our residents here, is we have very conscientious residents in regard to paying their tax bill. Most folks take advantage of the discount of paying early. That actually helps our local government by receiving the funds early, because that's less cash that we actually have to have in our reserves to be able to start the operations starting October 1. For that, we have to discount our revenue projections related to property tax because of those discounts that people take. And that's the reason why the state requires us, when we budget our revenues, to budget them at 95% of the state's determined projections, or in this instance that I'm talking about on property taxes, related to what those taxes would be based off the millage rate that have been adopted by the board. So normally when we talk about the proposed budget, the board is very focused on the general fund. Now we have other funds that make up the total local government budget, but the general fund is the one that most people key in on, because that's where property taxes is the vast majority of that particular revenue. And general fund means exactly what it is. It's general. That means that the board has the widest discretion of the use of those funds. And that's the reason why you have the bulk of your operational services, your personnel, are actually contained within that particular fund. So for the budget presentation, we look at balancing the budget. So obviously I'm going to present to the board a balanced budget, even under the proposed condition. And we look at the information of values that's provided by the property appraiser. Property appraiser is a separate constitutional officer. He makes the determination, looking at arm's length transactions that have been taking place, sets the values of residential, industrial, commercial properties. And so ultimately, we don't necessarily look at those individual properties. We receive the aggregate information that property appraiser reports to the state. And from that, if existing properties, and existing means that those properties were already improved and had value on them last year, and we see them again, then that goes towards demonstrating that that property has gained in value. That forces the millage rate, what's called a rollback rate, downward. So rising property values pushes the millage rate down to the rollback rate. And so that's the part, that's that point where at the rollback rate, if the board sets the millage rate at that millage rate, then there's neither a tax increase nor a tax decrease. So the millage rate that's proposed for next fiscal year that I presented was 6.2434. That's lower than the current millage rate that you paid for your tax bill related to 2020. But the board, during our discussion, gave me feedback to round that down to 6.24. So because it's lower than the rollback rate, that does constitute a tax cut. It's a small tax cut, and the board acknowledged that. But that's part of the message that the board wanted to send when they gave that direction is, yes, balance it at the rollback rate and you present it, and they'll start looking at how they may want to reduce that property tax burden on all the payers. And so that's one small reduction, is simply rounding it down from 6.2434 to 6.24. How we actually survive, if you will, from a local government related to that large property tax, because at the rollback rate, that means that you're not receiving any more property taxes revenue than you did the prior year. Where we gain is where you have new construction. That's new improvements that have come onto the books that's where you gain additional revenue that's not calculated in that rollback rate. And so there's roughly $4 million additional revenue that's coming in from property taxes based on new construction. Well, that sort of makes sense when you look at the pace of the villages being constructed during this period of time from last year to this year. Also, we have a lot of commercial activity that's been taking place. Even if you go up to 441, they're clearing ground right now for BJ's Wholesale. And that particular warehouse won't hit the books probably for another 2 years. Because it's not until that building is constructed and the certificate of occupancy is provided, and it also depends on the timing of when the property appraiser, if you will, closes the books, on which year we'll see that new construction value. So my point is that we have a lot of new construction that came onto the books, and I anticipate we're going to see a lot of additional new construction coming onto the books. That's very favorable in regard to making sure that we're having enough money to keep up with the service demand as we continue to grow, but also if there's areas that the board wants to try to improve to deliver the service, then there's revenue to be able to provide that service to the general fund. So I did have 3 little handouts at the table, and the reason for not doing a PowerPoint presentation, it's intended for you to have some takeaways. Because some of this stuff, it may take some time to digest. It may generate additional questions, which I left my business cards up there. If you want to email me, I'm happy to try to address the questions that you might have. But when you look at just the general fund component, you can see that the property tax revenue takes up 74% of all the revenues in the general fund to be able to cover those operational services. And again, that's the bulk of where our operational services. All your public safety, your sheriff's operation, your general government, like your tax collector, property appraiser, those are all sitting in your general fund. And so that's the reason why that revenue is important, because those are our typical highest growth areas, which is fire, ambulance, sheriff, for law enforcement, where we have the bulk of the expenditures. Matter of fact, up at the top, you can see that 62% of all of those expenditures are tied to public safety. And of course, from the government standpoint, that's really, I call it the first component that most people view for local government is being able to provide public safety. That's something that is typically not a easily traded service or good, if you will. That's something that typically falls into the government domain for providing that particular service. On the opposite side is sort of a rundown of services that the government of Sumter County provides. You'll see some redundancy because I have countywide, but then I sort of break it up into the icons from the front page to sort of show you the different services. So Sumter County, unlike many of our fellow counties across the state of Florida, actually has more consolidated services with its municipalities. That means that the county carries the vast majority of the expenditure burden and therefore has the largest revenue burden to be able to provide service across the entire county. So, for example, the sheriff's office provides not only the service to the unincorporated portion of the county, but also provides a service for 3 of their municipalities. Fire service is countywide. Ambulance service is countywide. So that doesn't go into the municipality's decision related to that particular provision of service. That's something that's already been consolidated with our municipalities. So talk about some of the changes from our current fiscal year into what's the proposed budget. There weren't a lot of, I'll call it, positions, because personnel does take up the bulk of the operational component of the budget. For the Board of County Commissioners, we are recognizing that AMR, who's our current ambulance provider, their contract ends next year. So we're waiting for the board to provide direction in October on what's the long-term structural delivery of that service that they would like to see. And then we'll move forward with that implementation process. So AMR understands their contract ends. There is no guarantee that even the structure would allow for going out and looking at other private providers for the ambulance service. So one of the early transition activities that we're doing with them, and that's proposed in the budget, is the county already owns the space and the equipment related to the dispatch operations. And so we're bringing those employees, if you will, on as county employees as part of that transitional process in preparation of the decision the board is going to make in regard to that long-term structure. We've spent a lot of time on animal services. We've had definitely a continued improvement over time in regard to level of service that we've provided. We're at that break point related to our contracted veterinarian services, cost-wise, that now it makes sense to consider an in-house veterinarian and an in-house vet tech to be able to provide the support. So that's something that's proposed in the budget. Those are the largest, I'll call it increases, if you will, for the budget and personnel. We have some with our constitutional officers that are in the budget. One of the larger items, which is about a $12 million item, has everything to do with growth that's occurring. Public safety radio, so the county provides that countywide. So we provide the public safety radio systems for our schools, for the municipalities, for the public works operation, all of our fire operations, our ambulance operation, all of our law enforcement entities across the county. It's very important, not only to have that capability within the vehicles, but on their person, with also the specific capabilities with the man-down button, all those type of things that are related to trying to provide the best equipment for our personnel and that are providing public safety and support. Because of the growth, we're at the point in time we need to expand the actual system itself, and we're getting to that point of where the original deployment of those radios, it's time for them to be replaced. So in the budget as proposed is a 5-year term, 0% interest financing by Motorola to be able to move forward with that upgrade and the replacement of the radios. So we actually have that built into the budget, and that's because it's 5 years. When you look at our budget document, we're not just looking at next fiscal year. We're actually looking at operationally over the next 5 years. In capital, we're actually looking at it even longer into the future. So we have those balanced out through those future years as well. We're also looking at doing some upgrades to those radios. We actually have our chief deputy of the sheriff's office actually trying out one right now, which actually has a GPS component associated with it, which makes it even better because the vehicles have the GPS on them, automatic vehicle locators, but when the law enforcement officer leaves the vehicle, they don't have the GPS on that particular person. So this provides it connected to our CAD system so that we can actually monitor where that individual is as they deploy from their particular vehicle. So again, trying to provide that additional tool and support for our public safety operations folks. One of the things that we have in here, which is expensive, is to expand, double, the Household Hazardous Waste Amnesty Day. If you've attempted to go to one of those, we have them at Lake Oklahoma, and just this year, our spring event, vehicles were backed up eastbound on State Route 44 from the park all the way to Powell Road. Okay, that's not very safe, and that's very concerning for us. That is our best location for being able to move people in, drop off their household hazardous waste, and move on. So we'll see that doubling the number of events, whether we can actually improve the flow and safety in that particular process. During the budget discussion, the board did direct that we have one of those on the south end of the county. So we'll have 3 at the Lake Oklahoma Park, and we'll wind up having 1 at the fairgrounds to be able to provide for that. And that's also a good trial run. You know, I definitely supported the board's direction. Not that I have much choice in that particular process, but this is one of those that I thought that was really great insight, bringing that forward, because as the villages grows down to Center Hill, the fairgrounds is going to be a convenient location for the southern part of the villages in the future. So that'll get us started in that particular process. Reserves is an issue. So we do have budgeting for the reserves for the general fund. And so one of the concerns that you should have with any government is how much money they do have in the reserves. You want them to have enough to be able to handle the items that are required, but not excessive where it's not putting your money to the job that you provided that to the government. So we keep the reserve for contingency at the minimum required by Florida statutes, which is 5% of the operational portion of the general fund. That means that we don't include the reserves in that particular calculation. We have at 4% what's called a reserve for cash balance forward. That means that you are going to have some money left over from one fiscal year that moves into the next fiscal year, which is cash balance forward. We do count that as a revenue. It's a one-time revenue, but what we try to do is have the reserve to be able to balance out and match ultimately to that revenue source, so that you're not relying on a one-time revenue source for reoccurring expenditures. That is one of the issues that led to, there are several contributing factors for the tax increase for the fiscal year 1920, but one of those was prior board direction to utilize a significant amount of reserves, and so that limited the options once you got to that particular fiscal year. And so there's a balance in there, and that's one of the things I do communicate with the board when we go through the budgetary process. So we're at those minimum by statute, and the minimum that's required for that particular purpose. I'm going to move beyond the general fund and talk about just 3 of the special revenue funds. And these are ones that have been part of the topic of the past, related to, for example, road impact fees and also the village's regional road agreement, which I did talk about when Cliff invited me the first time to the POA meeting. So there's actually 2 documents. These are the other 2 of the 3. One has a map that shows Exhibit A that's updated July 6, 2020, which is the exhibit from the village's regional road agreement. This is an agreement that was entered into in 2018, and it is one of these economic development decisions of the Board of County Commissioners to be able to support the continuation of the villages. Matter of fact, that decision led to the villages closing on additional property, which actually, again, takes it all the way down to the northern limits of the city of Sumter Hill. So that was a large decision by the Board of County Commissioners, and it was a large decision by the developer to do that additional acquisition to carry this dream that you're living in all the way down to that area. The county has an obligation with its municipalities, again, consolidated function. The board is responsible for the design, the maintenance, the construction of all the regional roads in Sumter County that aren't otherwise provided by the state of Florida. So we're not responsible for I-75. And the county is not responsible for the turnpike, although there's interactions we have with both of those arterials for the state of Florida. That responsibility played heavily into this decision of the board when they entered into this agreement in 2018. So the reason I'm providing you an update is this is one that's recently an amendment that actually provides names to the future roads, where the original exhibit had roads A, B, C. Those roads are now Landstone, Bexley, McNeil, but also to share with you what has already occurred in regard to fulfilling, and I'll show you where our obligations are associated with that agreement and the financial information that I'm providing. The yellow bound roads that are on this map, those are the ones that the developer, the villages, is responsible for doing the design, the permitting, providing the right-of-way, and doing the construction. The county approves the design, the county approves the budget that's associated with those particular roads, and the county provides reimbursement for the construction component only. And so many of these roads are reimbursable 5 years from the invoicing when it began. Through an amendment to the agreement, there's some additional roads that were removed, some roads that were placed in, but the new ones that were placed in have a 15-year term of when they're paid back. So when I'm looking at the cash flow related to those reimbursements, and you've already seen Marsh Bend Trail constructed down to the Corbin Roundabout. You've seen it constructed all the way up where the multimodal bridge is. One of the projects that's already been released is to take Marsh Bend Trail north to connect to 301 and have a signalized intersection at 301. You've seen Magason from 44 with the signalization at that location. You've seen it construct all the way down to Warm Springs. The improvements on Warm Springs, east of the Turnpike. Magason, south of Warm Springs, all the way to Bexley Trail, which heads to the future bridge across the Turnpike. You've also seen Morse Phase 10, which was the roundabout at Morse and Warm Springs as it travels down and connects to Magason. So all those roads that you've seen that have been constructed, the clock had already started when that first invoice came in for the 5-year repayment for those particular roads. The ones that are 15-year payments, 2 of them have just recently launched. Central Parkway, formerly known as 470, from in front of the federal prison to Marsh Bend Trail, future roundabout there. That is one that started the construction. That's almost a $15 million project. That's reimbursable in 15 years. The Bexley Bridge, that's the 4-lane plus multimodal lane that's going to be crossing the Turnpike from Magason, if you will, over to the west side of the Turnpike. Again, that's a $15 million project as well. That one's already started construction. And when you're looking at, again, those reimbursements, you have a little bit of a front load on some of that activity that has been very robust in 2018 up to date. And now you have 2 projects that are 15 years into the future. So your cash requirements to meet those obligations on reimbursement construction, you have a big bump at the beginning, and you have a very significant bump at the end of that particular construction activity within the agreement. There's a couple of roads that are sort of blue bounded. There's 3 of them. One is County Road 525E, which is near the I-75 Simple. That one is in its almost to the last phase construction. There's one more phase, which is actually taking the 2 lanes to the 4 lanes. We're doing right now, building 2 of the lanes on one side of the right-of-way so that we don't have to stop traffic to be able to build the other 2 lanes in the future. We're doing a 4-lane crossing of the CSX Railroad, and that was actually started as far as the 2-lane and this concept before the villages bought the property in that area, which is now the Governor Rick Scott Industrial Park. And if you've not been out to that industrial park, there's a significant number of industry that's already located there. It's drawn a lot of outside companies to look to locate here in Sumter County to help diversify our tax base beyond it being still predominantly residential. There's another road, which is Buena Vista, which you are familiar where it terminates at 34. We're in the right-of-way acquisition process right now. The design is complete. We're doing the right-of-way. And so that'll actually swing around the Wildwood Country Resort and connect to a roundabout in Magason. That provides us the parallel north-south movement of vehicles to try to keep our roads at 4-lane typical sections max to not move into that 6-lane criteria. And then you see Marsh Bend Trail from Corbin down to Central Parkway is the one the county is responsible for. But in our amendment to the agreement, it was originally going to be a requirement for the county to do 4 lanes. We now have flexibility of looking at it as a 2-lane facility. And so we're starting our preliminary engineering review of that activity. So there's a lot more construction about to happen on the roads. And as you see, the typical path of the village's companies is they build that infrastructure, and right behind it is the residential, and then right behind the residential is the commercial construction. And that's the new growth component, again, that feeds back into the general fund. So how do you pay for this $277 million estimated price associated with that, that right now projected out to about 2040 of when we might anticipate having those bills due? Again, it goes back to the cash flow. Within the agreement, gas taxes is the specific revenue that is obligated. So I'm going to just turn briefly to this other sheet. One side has fuel tax. I use the term gas tax, but fuel tax. And the other one is road impact fees. I'm going to talk about road impact fees first. Although it is not specifically the obligated revenue source, it is the one that we're going to be using to pay those initial bills first. And once those funds have been exhausted, then we'll turn to the gas taxes to make up for the difference, or fuel tax. So on the road impact fees, one of the things that the commissioners that are new at the table here came in they recognized what that obligation was associated with the village's regional road agreement. They also recognized that road impact fees was not sufficient to be able to meet that long-term obligation, and even gas taxes was going to be stretched to try to meet that obligation. It does meet that obligation now, but the concern is that those monies aren't going towards other work on roads. Specifically, gas taxes you can use for road maintenance. Road impact fees, you cannot. Road impact fees can only be used for capacity improvements, new construction, adding a lane, improving intersections. That's it. And so when you're obligating a lot of your maintenance money for this obligation, then that starts skewing the time frame for us to be able to get to roads, do resurfacing, those type of things. So the good news is that even though the board members, these three specifically, did support an increase in the road impact fee, they were thwarted by the state. The state saw that as we were moving into a boom, there were a lot of people that were complaining about local governments increasing impact fees, and therefore they took it upon themselves to remove that concern. And so they actually made this particular law that was signed, Senate Bill, I know it's House Bill 4337, and Senate Bill 750. When that was signed into law, there was a retro component. So any actions taken following January 1st were basically null and void. So that killed the board members' approval of the increase in the road impact fee. Now, that's not necessarily funny, but I will tell you the funny part about it was the effective date was June 28th when the increase was going to take place. We had actually budgeted $5 million, that was an adopted budget for anticipated revenues for road impact fees. Leading up to June, we were still projecting about 4.6 million, and we received roughly about 3.6 by that point in time. Just the month of June was 3.2 million. Because the concern of that increase, we had a significant number of people submitting their building permits. The BJ's Wholesale is one of those. They got their plans in, and so now they're moving forward. So the one positive takeaway from that exercise, if you will, that the state afforded on the increase was it motivated a significant amount of development here in Sumter County. And so as I stated, new growth ultimately equals future property taxes coming in. So we'll see the benefit of that within a year or two for the general fund. I did not take into account, even when we were planning our budgeting processes, of that particular increase having a significant dollar amount on the revenues, because rate times volume equals the actual dollars. So if you go up, there's the potential that you have less volume of activity, and therefore you're not going to receive as much revenue. We balance out, and so you'll see in this road impact fees, you see green revenue, but you have the expenditures that are significantly higher than the revenues. That's because there's a, down at the bottom, you see reserve for road projects. We've been accumulating money to be able to meet that future obligation, to be able to pay for that initially. But you can see that we use up all of those reserves and road impact fees meeting the obligation by the time we get to fiscal year 26-27. If you flip over to fuel tax, you'll see regional road reimbursement as an expenditure. You start seeing the gas taxes picking up part of the freight. Fiscal year 22-23, it increases to 12 million in 24-25, and then drops down. That's that initial bulge of road construction activity. It'll wind up settling out until we get to that larger payment towards the end of the term, if you will, of the agreement. So there's, again, this also shows your expenditures greater than the revenues, again, because there's reserves that are being carried. Those come forward. So I took out, I didn't want to provide a false representation related to the revenues. But some of that is simply your reserves coming back as cash balance forward to meet those particular obligations. So in addition to those balanced budget discussions and those specific topics, I did want to share some of the other things that are not yet known. So for example, the American Rescue Plan Act, Sumter County has been told that we may have $25 million coming from that. All right? That doesn't mean that that's going to happen today. Matter of fact, the U.S. Treasury has not finalized the rules related to how that money can be utilized. It's still not clear if those funds are going to go through the state and then to the county, but the use of those funds are limited. And so it's not a supplanting revenue for anything that I just presented to you. It cannot be used for roads. It's not intended to supplant any of those operational expenditures in the budget. It's really targeted towards pandemic preparation, which has a lot of questions related to the interpretation of what the money can be used for that. But it really targets water and sewer infrastructure improvements and broadband. Well, the county's not in the water and sewer business. We're not in the broadband business. However, one of the things we talked about with the board is how can we help our municipalities that are in the water and sewer business to help them improve their viability for future economic development by having that service available, and where are those areas outside of the villages and outside of some of our specific municipal areas that could benefit from a partnership with, for example, Charter Communications, to be able to close some of the gaps related to internet access. And so we've already talked to Charter Communications, and we're looking at the Primacucci area as a potential service area that would tie in with where they're already mobilized in. So those are the highlights of the proposed budget. Certainly happy to answer any questions that the group may have related to not only the budget that I presented, but also any of our services that we provide as a county.
Okay, like I said, I'm going to start. So the first question I have is for Craig. So I need Oren and Gary to step out of the room for a minute. I don't want to violate any sunshine rules. Not trying to get them in any kind of trouble. I'm right. We have enough issues. So, Craig, the question is. The question is, the Daily Sun has made it sound like the 3 new commissioners have not fulfilled their campaign promise to roll back property tax rates. Please explain why you cannot roll the full 25% increase back by the previous commissioners all at one time.
That is a good question. Can you hear me all right? That is a good question, and
Stand here so we can see you on our video. Thank you.
that is a good question. And I will answer that question. First of all, with regard to the Daily Sun, I'm not going to make any comments about what is or is not in the paper, but I will tell you and address the 25% millage rate increase from 2019-20. And what individually I am doing. I can only speak for myself. I'm 20% of the board, and I can tell you what I look at. Exactly what Mr. Arnold said. We have obligations that we have to fulfill, not only with the road agreement, but other obligations as well. We have to maintain our service level, which has improved and continued to improve even just in the 8 months I've been here. So as we continue with those improvements and we continue with paying our bills, we have to look at where we can be efficient and effective when we do have to reduce what we're putting into the budget. I have talked with Mr. Arnold, and he is working with me right now to continue to try and find ways to work toward saving more money to put back into the taxpayers' pockets. We did have a bump in the road with the impact fee, which would have opened the opportunity for us to serve those unserved areas, perhaps in the county, or underserved areas in the county in different areas. So now we have to backfill what we do have with general revenues or other revenues like the gas tax that could be utilized for repairs of the road and that sort of thing. So I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to continue to look and see what I can do to incrementally go through during my 4-year term here and continue to reduce with respect to making sure that you all get the services you want. I'm going to bring up another piece here, just as a spin-off from that, if I may. And that is this. I listen to what the taxpayers have to say when they come to an open public meeting. I think it's critical for us to listen to the people that vote for us, okay? So because that's important to me, I don't make my decision on any public hearing until that public hearing is over. And that's an honest answer. I have inklings, just like everybody else does, and I have good points and bad points on what I'm looking at. But I want to hear what the public has to say. And then I take that, and that also becomes a factor in the decision that I make on that day of the public hearing. So let's go all the way back to fire assessment fee. I listen to the public, okay? And the assessment was not raised, and that also has a direct connection with the Daily Sun and information that may or may not have come out in those particular articles. But we did not raise the fire assessment fee. So that particular MSBU then is not going to be able to help us away from the general fund as far as the monies that are flowing. That money that goes up on the fire side of the house, I think $3 million this year or so, right in that area, it's going to all come out of the general fund because we did not raise the fire assessment. So we want to give you good service. We want to make sure we listen to you. But please remember, we're both responsible for what we say. The taxpayer's responsible when you come and say, I don't want to spend this, that's okay. But then don't turn around and give a demand to us that we can't meet. So it's a dual role here. And I want to do the very best I can for you. I want to answer your questions. I want to make sure you get the best service that I can give you. Okay, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Craig. You want to ask our two commissioners to come back? Next question for Mr. Arnold. Please explain the difference between a tax and an impact fee.
Sure. On the sheet that I did provide for road impact fee, it is a fee that is charged at the time of building permit issuance. And it is calculated based off of the consumption of capacity of the road system, based off, for our instances, a study that was adopted in 2019. And so it is a fee that's paid at that time by a limited number of users, those folks that are coming for building permit construction. So from a tax standpoint, it's typically I'll call it a broader net that is not tied specifically to your use. That's where property taxes, for example, are paid in. It's called ad valorem because you are charged, if you will, based on the property value that you have. And so that is a contribution not to a specific purpose, but to a general purpose of provision of governmental requirements. Sales tax, very similar. So you're paying for a good or service, and you're paying a sales tax. A portion of those sales taxes are assigned specifically for Sumter County. That money, again, comes in for the general purpose, and those monies do ultimately go into the general fund for supporting operations.
Okay. The reason I asked those two questions is because I'm tired of reading misinformation in the Daily Sun. So now that that's out of the way, I have two more questions for Mr. Arnold. Please comment on the current work of the ad hoc EMS committee, and from your perspective, why any option other than utilizing the infrastructure and trained personnel of the village's public safety department should even be considered.
Sure. So I'll answer in a couple of different ways. One is, I know that the end of the AMR contract is next year. And so on May 18th is the reason why I presented to the board that before we assume that we're going to continue in regard to the same structure, this is the time to go ahead and give some direction of where you want to go structure-wise for provision of fire service and also medical response and transport. So I have been accused of not presenting enough options to the board, so I provided 10 options to the board. And so I actually had someone after the meeting say you provided too many options to the board. They're intelligent board members, and so I think 10 was not too much. But basically, those were derivatives of basic function is, do you keep 2 separate fire departments for a countywide service provision? Do you continue to keep a contracted ambulance service for the medical transport? Those are serious questions. Those have impacts related to cost of provision of service, which is an efficiency component. It also has to do with the effectiveness component of delivering that service to the citizens. I've certainly received, there's been enough newspaper articles related to people concerned about the ambulance service, and we understand that. And I also recognize that people discount the fact that we were having to deal with a pandemic, and actually the ambulance service and the hospital systems were 2 of the most heavily hit of our public safety entities. But regardless of that, where do you want to go long term is the question I've asked the board. And that's how I've put those options to them. So I have not provided a recommendation at this time. The board wanted to have sort of an independent group of folks that are not currently in that system or responsible for that system, as I am, and the board, to be able to review the information and provide, and again, from a separate committee, input to the board. So that's an additional input for the board that will go along with my recommendation and their own deliberation to give me that decision in October. The reason for that time frame is if there's going to be a private contractor still provided, we have to build across the entire system. And that's one of the things that's a big focus of the board for the past 2 years, is trying to get the agencies to work as one. They're not all on the same performance measures. And so that's one of the biggest issues, to be able to look for, ultimately on the medical side, positive patient outcomes. That's what we want to have. We really want the hospital system to be party to that, so that from the call to the response to the transport to the treatment at the hospital, for them walking out both with physical and mental capacity still present, that's a win. That's what we're looking for. So the ad hoc committee is not looking at that cost efficiency issue. That's not their charge by the board. Their charge is focused on the effective component of what they think would be the best service model structure, and that's the input to the board. So that's my response, that I don't have my recommendation presented yet, because there's a due process that ad hoc committee has to provide their input to the board by the end of September, and then I'll provide my input in October when the board's ready to make their decision.
Okay, one last question. Please explain why the financial penalties for wait times provided in the contract has never been assessed to AMR, and also please explain why the conflict of interest, or the presumption of conflict of interest by the assistant county administrator and his wife, who happens to manage AMR, has been allowed to happen. The perception is really bad from resident standpoint.
Okay, and I'll start with that one first. That's sort of sad that people jump to an unprofessional conclusion and ignore what the facts are. I'm the responsible party for managing any of the compliance components and the penalty provisions that are associated with the AMR contract, not Mr. Kennedy. What we do have, though, is we actually have had AMR, which was originally Rural Metro in the initial contract, they were hit with penalties. And so part of that was when we made the transition from Lake Sumter EMS to Rural Metro. Lake Sumter EMS had provided us bad data, in which both Rural Metro and AMR were the 2 respondents to the original request for proposals. So they went through, I call it a trial by fire, including penalties, to be able to ultimately get to response time criteria within the contract. What's happened is, over time, is we've continued to improve the system to where response time should not be the only measure for an ambulance service. Again, back to patient outcomes, there's a lot of additional support. There's also other ways to have better efficiency in the deployment of that particular service that are not called for in that contract. So again, I need direction from the board on the structure to be able to go through and make those modifications. I'll call it that the worst times that we've had for response have been during the pandemic. Well, during a local state of emergency, in which we were in for over a year, those penalty provisions and performance criteria are waived. I mean, if you've been in private sector business before, there's such a thing as force majeure, things that are outside of your control that impact your performance within a particular contract. And that's what we have. So as soon as the board relinquished the local state of emergency, then the performance criteria is back on, the penalty provisions are ready to go again. But we've moved beyond, I'll call it the current performance measures that are in that contract. We're in a priority dispatch operation. We're actually doing a lot of support, even from the dispatch, before any of our responders even get to the site. We have a lot of that process that the medical director signed off where dispatchers can actually help people right then and there before the responders hit the scene. So long answer, but I think I addressed the specific 2 questions that you have.
You did. I could ask many more, but I'm going to open it up to the audience. So, Jerry? No, you can't say anything unless he leaves.
Oh, yeah, you gotta leave. You're out of here. Take a walk. Long hair.
I see you, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to correct something I said earlier on the fire piece. I just went in and crunched the numbers. I saw the pain in his face, and when I said $3 million, let me correct that and say it's going to be a wash this year because there's actually a reduction in the proposal for this year. So, did that remove your pain from your face? Okay. I wanted to make sure you got the right information. So I wanted to crunch the numbers, and for this year, it's not. But if there is an increase without an increase in the fire assessment, that will have to come unless there's a change from the source.
Sal, you can let him in.
Okay, I must say that you did present a very politically correct way of explaining how the impact fees got thrown out up at the State House. The fact that the person bringing it up was paid by the developer, I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. Okay.
I'm not sure if that was a question.
It wasn't. But looking at the road impact fees, and obviously an unbalanced, though you said it's made up by the gas tax. And these only balance out, assuming the villages stops building, which we all know is not going to happen. I'm sure there's a road that's going over I-75, but have you considered doing a building moratorium until these costs can be brought under control and the developer is a little more willing to provide some funds for these roads?
So let me, first of all, just correct a component, because if I did not state it correctly, I will restate it. The village's regional road agreement is balanced throughout the term of that agreement, both using road impact fees and the gas taxes moving forward from today on. So where you see expenditures are greater than the revenues in the charts that I gave you is because I removed the cash balance forward, where the reserves come in as cash balance forward to the next fiscal year, because that throws off what the actual revenues are coming from those sources. So those are actually balanced throughout that entire term through 2040 at this time.
Okay, and what about the consideration of a building moratorium until the developer is willing to provide additional funding for these roads?
So any moratorium, so I'll just address general moratorium, whether it's you don't like a particular use, you don't like growth, whatever the thing is, you can't legally do any type of moratorium unless you can show, demonstrate, there's some type of public, I'll call it safety-related issue, is predominantly the only thing that you could really hang your hat on to be able to stop people from exercising their rights of use of their property. And so Florida is a strong private property rights protection state. Matter of fact, they just beefed up the Right to Farm Act, to where if people are doing stuff on their farm and the neighbors don't like it, there's very little that the local government can do. The state preempts our ordinances related to, and even preempts fire protection ordinances for farm-related operations. So that right of the use of the property is very well protected by the state of Florida. So developers have a right to continue to be able to throw in a moratorium. It's hard to pin where that specific safety-related issue is that would cause harm to the public to be able to have as the basis for the board to consider ever doing a moratorium.
Just a couple quickies. The first one, your radio equipment, will that include the visual for the officers? You know, where they can, when they have an arrest or whatever?
So right now, the sheriff's office does use body cams, and the public safety radio system, because I was talking about the GPS component in it, the body cams, the company that sells those has the GPS capabilities, but the cost is exorbitant. And that's the reason why the sheriff's office is not going to go with that company for the GPS component on the body cams. There's better utilization overall for that to be part of the public safety radio itself. And so that's where we're moving towards that particular type of...
Cheaper.
It's lower cost, but
Yeah.
also you have better utilization with that tool versus the body cam tool.
Okay, the other question I had is relative to staffing. Does that create any issues as far as the arrival at these accidents that happen, you know, the emergency units and all that, or is staffing available?
So from staffing standpoint, it's a broad question.
Can you hire the people that you need to accomplish your task?
I think everyone is challenged with hiring individuals right now. Florida is in a boom economy. We do have a lot of folks that are trying to escape northern states. We're hoping that some of them want to be able to fill some of these particular jobs. But that is one of the statements that AMR has made to the ad hoc committee as well as to me, is that that's one of their biggest challenges. That's the reason they're doing $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 bonuses to be able to bring paramedics onto their organization. We have issues within our operation. Animal control is one of the hardest positions, even though we've bumped up the pay grade to be able to provide for recruitment, retention. It's a challenging job.
He's next, you'll go
And
after
so
him.
It's challenging in several of our different areas. I'm actually the acting development services director right now. Our director passed away, and so we've not had hardly any applications for that one. When you're in a boom time, planners go where the money is, private sector. During a recession, there's more than you need, and so they start scrambling. And so building inspectors are the same thing. That's the reason we contract out our building inspection and plan review. We have an in-house building official and chief fire inspector that does the quality assurance over that process, but they suffer those ups and downs that are related to the economy. So depends on the industry, but certainly medical is a significant issue. There's a lot of folks that walked out of the medical field because of COVID.
Okay, question.
Yep. My question is there's a good possibility that AMR may not be our ambulance service, and it may be that the county takes up transport, because like 5 of those options included that. So since that's going to happen early next year, are we already putting aside money, or where's the money going to come from if you decide to, that the fire department's going to now do transport?
Sure. So in those options that are presented to the board, my job, again, the reason why I'm looking for an early determination regarding the structure the board wants to do, is I have to have time to prepare for the implementation, not just operationally, but also financially. So we're already making the one move, because AMR's contract does end next year, of bringing those employees on as county employees for the dispatch operation. So that's one segment of call it accomplished. The next segment is really associated with the transport units themselves, the equipment that are associated with those transport units. And obviously I have frank conversations with AMR because they and we need to prepare, if you will, for them, worst case scenario, that they're not here anymore. And so the question is, what are your plans for your equipment and vehicles? And are you planning to move those to another market? If so, that's great. If not, then we need to start talking about what is the valuation of those and whether we can acquire those particular assets for our purposes. Likewise for the personnel. They've got a lot of good people. They've got people that live here in Sumter County. And so the question is, are those folks wanting to stay here, or are they going to go to AMR's next market? And so we've already started that particular, when's an appropriate time to have that communication through AMR to their personnel to be able to help that transition. Again, you don't want to lose good people. We just talked about that it's challenging to be able to fill positions, and if you already have people that live here that are already in the system, what better way to try to go ahead and start preparing that recruitment. Again, the board's decision helps me in the communication, planning for the operation finances, but also provides that reassurance because most people fear the unknown. Once the board makes a structural decision, we now have an answer, and now we start working towards, again, the implementation of that answer.
Over here. Mr. Arnold, yeah, I'd like to get back to the fuel tax again. The question is, given the fact that our upcoming budgets are going to be increasingly more reliant on fuel taxes to pay for some of these, the loss of the impact phase, given the fact that our federal government is now pushing for EVs and LEVs over fossil fuel vehicles, have you factored into the budget the fact that there may be less income rather than more based upon fuel taxes? And do you foresee the need to increase fuel taxes in order to make up the difference?
No, those are good questions. Those are actually part of the budget presentation with the board covering that specific point. We've never seen, I'll call it exponential growth in fuel taxes. It's been flat or slightly growing, and so some of that has to do with fuel tax. It's cent per gallon, so it's not a percentage of your sales. So if prices go up, it doesn't necessarily help us because people may be buying less, and also people make decisions to move to hybrid vehicles, more fuel-efficient vehicles, electric vehicles. And so, no, we actually have taken that into account. Where we've actually had continued increases has really to do with our continued growth. We've had more consumers of that particular product. We also have a lot more movement on the interstate and the turnpike, which also patrons us at those different locations. The Oklahoma Plaza is an example. That's in Sumter County on the turnpike. So we benefit from those particular gas taxes. So I'm not, I'll call it real aggressive in long-term projections, if you will. It's slight growth, flat over that period of time. You're correct, at the federal level, they're talking about the infrastructure bill. And in that infrastructure bill, there is the traditional road and bridge money that is intended, again, assuming that Congress comes up with a bill that they can agree upon and the president signs it, that there's road, bridge, there's broadband in it as well. There's also electric vehicle, there's also alternative fuels. There's quite a variety of different things that are being talked about within that bill. That part does, on the roads and bridges component, that is a supplement for us. That would help move us to play catch up in our infrastructure, and that helps move our gas taxes a little bit longer, if you will, take some of that burden off of them at that time. So again, I'm waiting for that decision of the federal government, but yes, sir, we've taken into account flat projections. You did ask one other question. There's no point in considering the next cents to increase. There's not enough revenue coming off of those because those are gas only. And so when I ran the numbers, it was probably 6 years ago, when I ran the numbers, you're looking at about a $600,000 per year increase to go through a political decision of increasing a tax. So that's something that if the board wanted to pursue that, that's a political decision, but it's a question of what's your return on that political decision. The remaining cents don't generate as much as the current fuel tax levies, because those are levied beyond just gas only.
Over here.
Brad, 2018, what 5 commissioners voted unanimously for a road reimbursement agreement. Before that, the Morris family asked for $40 to $50 million to build roads. My concern was if they needed money to build roads, why were they developing? The next thing happens is county staff says to the commissioners, cash flow. We got a problem with cash flow with this. And the 25% tax, you came back assessment, that's what we needed to start the cash flow. After that, 20.5 million was added to supplement that. Is this how we have reimbursed? I don't mind reimbursed road agreements, but is this the process?
So the fiscal year 1920 budget had a lot of, the fiscal year 1920 budget had a lot of long-term, that was the moment of long-term planning shifts. So for example, the public works operations, about $5 million per year. Personnel, the ones that change signs, do potholes, all that, work activity, that moved from being covered by the gas taxes, it moved into the general fund to free up the gas taxes to be able to meet future obligations. The general fund transferred money into that special revenue fund to be able to meet the other road demands, to be able to free up gas taxes to meet that obligation. Y'all may recall that Morse and Buena Vista was resurfaced, rehabilitated in certain areas from 466 south to 44. So that was crammed into that fiscal year budget also, because that was the direction of the board. They'd heard a lot of complaints about the condition of the road, and they wanted to make it happen at that time. We also had a significant increase in the budget request from the district government for the village public safety department. So that was also in there, and that's a general fund hit. So there were multiple things that hit that general fund budget that resulted in the millage rate required to generate the property taxes to balance the budget. So again, that's a board's decision. That's a policy decision, and that was a significant policy decision related to that. They viewed long-term that the growth of the villages beyond 44 was going to be positive for the community as a whole, not only in delivering services, providing opportunities for the workforce that was living here in Sumter County, but also, again, just continued vitality of our community. There's significant spin-off to all of our areas outside the villages. Wildwood now is the city where the villages are growing south of 44. And so they are gaining a significant benefit. They're actually utilizing funds to be able to go and do some things, and there's non-villages part of the city that they've been planning for quite some time, but didn't have the revenue to be able to do that.
Over here, next question.
Okay. You're off the hook on this one. Were the other 2 commissioners invited to this meeting? And if not, why not?
I can only answer that. Cliff invited me. I didn't know that he had invited other commissioners. So.
I actually only invited Mr. Arnold and Mr. Estep. The other 2 showed up on their own. Mr. Gilvin and Mr. Breeden could have showed up, and they'd have been more than welcome. But I will tell you, in my 6 years as president, they've never been at one of my meetings.
Now, we got to see if anyone else.
Why do they leave? Just curious.
Here.
Why do those 2 guys leave?
Florida has what's called the sunshine law, and if they're going to discuss something or say something that would come before them as commissioners, they are in jeopardy of a fine, so they cannot be in the room when they're discussing issues that would pertain to them.
Yeah, now that you're talking about all these roads, year and a half, 2 years ago, they came through a lot of the cul-de-sac areas and the main streets and repaved. The cul-de-sacs, they put down some cheap stuff, not the same as what they put in the roads. They continually track into your driveways. I don't know, the oil keeps separating out of it, not like it does in the main roads and the asphalt. So, I mean, we pay the same tax as the people that live on the streets. They got the good stuff, we got the bad stuff. How do we get the same stuff all the way through? We got a lot of cul-de-sacs. They've all been done the same way. And everybody's bitching about it, and nothing seems to be done about it.
I can answer the question.
Good.
Sure. So it does require, because of how the machinery will operate in the cul-de-sac, for pavement preservation, because that's really what you're talking about. It's not a mill and resurface. It's really putting preservative to be able to have the actual structure of the road last longer. So you're correct. It is two different products, and I'll tell you that it's not cheaper in regard to doing the cul-de-sacs. It's actually more expensive to do the cul-de-sacs with that particular material. We have tried different materials, and you said 2 years ago, roughly. So we've actually changed the product from 2 years ago, trying out different things that hold together a little bit stronger in the cul-de-sacs. That's the reason why we do the press release related to our preservation work activity, which is actually occurring right now on certain streets within the villages, related to when you can drive on it, when you should not drive on it, and also within the cul-de-sacs. It takes longer for the cul-de-sacs to go through the cure process because of the material and because of how it's put in versus the main roads. So happy to work outside of the meeting to look at your specific concern that you've got, and also provide you some additional information related to why those are different and what the rules are for curing in those areas. Sometimes, I'll say our residents, for the most part, help and respect during that work activity, but sometimes it's challenging with other folks that may not live in that area that may be traversing it, and that's where we do get a lot of tracking. I actually did have one lady that didn't want to listen to the time frame that it was needed to cure, and she actually drove through the area that hadn't been cured and didn't want to go past the equipment because they're still working, drove through people's decorative driveway and just tracked it across that decorative driveway. So there's also, courtesy component, from a neighbor standpoint when we're going through that work activity. But I get you additional information and look at your specific cul-de-sac of concern and see what we can do to address it in the future.
Question.
Sure.
This is probably going to be the Board of Commissioners. Returning to the ad hoc committee. Yeah, whichever one might want to answer it. I noticed, I'm a new resident. And I noticed in the article on it that initially the commissioners were going to appoint a committee based on fire and hospital representatives, but later changed their minds and excluded them. I am a retired firefighter medic officer with a long history in EMS, and I'm just wondering why professionals in the field were excluded. And are the members of the committee, what are their qualifications?
That's a good question, and thank you for your service. But I can tell you that, in fact, we do have professionals that have served. That was initially put out. That was a proposal that we may want to look at that. That's not what each commissioner chose to do. Each commissioner was allowed to nominate someone from their district. And so there are people on there that serve from fire, EMS, and have served on ambulances as well. So that actually is not correct information, only because it was initially that way put out, I think in the paper, I'm not sure. But that wasn't a slam, I think that's where it came from. It was put in there. But they get their information elsewhere as well. And while these guys aren't in here, I got to tell you, another piece on the gas tax You talked about maybe we look at raising gas taxes, things like that. That's one of the questions I presented to Mr. Arnold. We're sweeping every corner we can sweep to look at where we can pull revenue in. And Mr. Arnold told me the same thing several months ago when I looked at that particular issue. I do want to share one piece with you. It's not into fruition yet, but it is in the talking circles throughout the state and throughout the city and county organizations that utilize different fuel taxes and things like that. They are looking at, for those EVs and LEVs and the other Vs that are out there, that are electrical vehicles, they're looking at an alternative to or a supplement of a fuel tax. So if you have a vehicle rated at 50 miles to the gallon, for example, you may pay the fuel tax and X on your registration. If you have a full EV and that's all you run on, you may pay a different charge on your registration. So they're looking at all kinds of different things. And there's a lot of information out there. There's nothing concrete yet, but it is being addressed. It is being looked at nationwide because there are issues like that.
Okay, do we want to bring in the ghost commissioners?
Sure.
Got a question for Arnold?
I believe it will be. I'd really like to know whose brilliant idea it was to do Morris and Buena Vista in the middle of the day at the highest impact of traffic, instead of doing it in the evening like done on other major roads.
Sure. So depending on the section of the road, some of the work was actually done in the evenings. And we had people complaining about the work being done in the evenings because it was waking them up with the beeping noise. So there is no win solution for us related to road construction. But as it relates to the area where we had to do the rehabilitation, that's the reason why we're doing it during the day. Because that rehabilitation work activity, they needed to have the daylight to be able to do that particular work in those sections. Because they're getting down beyond just a normal mill and resurface. They actually had to go into the base to be able to do some repair work. And so that was the decision. But again, there was no win solution for us because we had people complaining about the work activity during the day, but we also had people complaining about the work activity in the evenings.
Okay, question here. One more.
Yes.
This will be the last question.
By the way, thank you for coming.
Yes, sir.
Very informative. I have two questions. The first has to do with roads. A lot of interest in roads. The developer is responsible, as I think you indicated, for well over $100 million worth of these regional roads that are going to be reimbursed to him through the county. What assurance do we have as citizens that ultimately are going to be paying for those roads that the amount that he asks for reimbursement is not only a competitive number, but a number as good as if the county bid it out publicly? Because it's my understanding he can select whoever he wants, and we have to reimburse. So please explain what checks and balances we have to assure ourselves for that. And number two, do we have a full-time inspection to make sure that not only is the installation according to your specifications, but that the materials that are being put in are also tested? Do we have full-time inspection? And the last piece, per that road agreement, the developer is obligated to construct a fourth town center. Is anything that he has under construction now, in your opinion, qualifying for that fourth town center, or is that something that is going to be in the future? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start with the last question first. So the answer is no. The fourth downtown obligation has not moved forward, but you may be aware of the announcement that the village's developer has done through the Daily Sun, which is actually 3 downtowns. One is a medical village that's being proposed at the Lake County, Sumter County line. There's also I'm not using the correct terminology, but a recreation sports related downtown That is to the west of that downtown. And then there's a non-age restricted downtown that's intended to be part of the non-age restricted residential area where the new charter schools are going to be going in across from the federal prison south of Central Parkway. So those plans are forthcoming. They've made those general announcements. And so one of the roads that I talked about earlier for construction Central Parkway, which is the widening and realignment of what was 470 from in front of the federal prison to Marsh Bend Trail, that's part of that. There's a spin-off road, which we've approved also to start construction in Landstone Phase 1. That comes off of that, headed south, and that'll run past the downtown area, the non-age restricted residential, or the charter schools. So they're headed in that direction to meet that obligation. So that's the first answer to the last question we had. So then I got to address his checks and balances related to the agreement. So in the agreement, we actually have a little bit more robust activity than what we've ever had before, work with the developer related to our agreements. Number one, we do approve the design. Through that process, we also approve the budget that's associated with it, which sets the maximum dollar amount that will be reimbursable for that particular project. Once I give them notice to proceed, they start the construction. We actually have 2 full-time inspectors that not only handle those road construction projects, but any of our other road construction projects. Once we get to and we do have testing lab related to the materials. So you can see where the cores have occurred for the road construction. We also have video of all the stormwater pipes that are crossing underneath the roads. That's where we've seen in the past deficiencies, is on the stormwater pipes that ultimately undermine the subbase and base of the road. And so we do video, we have them make those repairs. We get the deeds, and so once they've met the punch list, all those issues are addressed, then we bring it to the board for acceptance. After acceptance, there's a 1-year warranty. And so at 10 months into that warranty, we're going to go back and video the lines again to make sure there's been no shifting of the stormwater pipes, because again, that's the biggest threat to the roads, is the underground stormwater piping. So those are the assurances that we have. The last answer to your question that you raised related to comparison, if we've gone out and straight bid it, actually had our public works director run our recent bid numbers compared to what we're actually invoicing for closing out projects, and Villages is doing a heck of a lot cheaper than we ever could. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're already doing mass grade activities, they're already mobilized, and also they have the bulk purchase of those materials like the stormwater pipe, etc. Whereas other normal road contractors, they're bidding at that time of that particular project on a limited volume, and so they're not going to get the same discounts that the developer gets.
Okay, I'd like to address my question to any of the commissioners who'd like to answer. The commission raised the road impact fees by 75%. A later state law retroactively rolled it back, but they didn't roll it back to 0. They rolled it back, I believe, to 12.5%. And I was wondering, why didn't the Board of Commissioners raise the road impact fees by their maximum allowed by law and then gradually raise it over the years?
That's an outstanding question, and I'll answer that for you right now. Part of that law also included the fact that we have to have a 2/3 vote to pass that 12.5%. That means we have to have 4 votes. That was a part of the law. I don't think we'd get 4 votes to pass it. So therefore, I don't want to expend, this is just me talking, I'm 1/5 of the board. I don't want to expend personnel time. I don't want to expend effort towards something that I know isn't going to pass, in my opinion. Okay? And I definitely don't want to do a full-blown impact study with a large price tag to it that the taxpayers are not going to get their best bang for their buck. So I can only tell you why I didn't pursue that, because I don't think we have 4 out of 5 votes.
Somebody answer to that. That's why next year, there's an election, and we'll try and get 2 more people
Excuse me.
elected, so they will have their 4 out
Gary
of their
wants
5
to make a
votes.
comment. Could you step out?
You don't have to actually leave for this one. I just wanted to comment, somebody said, why, about the other commissioners coming here. First of all, I've been coming to POA meetings for years. I'm a member of the POA. And I've been coming long before I was a commissioner. And that's why I'm here tonight again, because I'm interested in what the POA is talking about, and especially if our county administrator is coming. I didn't come to listen to Craig, nor can I. But if you noticed, our county commissioner can listen to 40 questions, remember them, and answer them. You know, I'd have to be writing them down. But the reason I'm here is because I'm interested in the POA and what it does to represent the people, and I've been coming long before I was a commissioner, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Dad. I want to thank all 3 of the commissioners that showed up, and Bradley, and again, like I said the last time, you're welcome to come back anytime. Just let me know, and we will set it up. You're always welcome here. Guys, don't forget, next month, Public Safety Department will be at Everglades. We have donuts in the back, small crowd, lots of donuts. Please help yourself. There's coffee over there. Thank you all for coming.
Oh, thank you. What are these things?
You honor you support the public service.